I'd like to point out that I'm sitting in front of the uh,
Oh,
the gates
wow.
that Nol created for the National Cathedral.
Wow.
And if you don't know about his work for the National Cathedral, if you just Google Nol Putnam Cathedral, you'll get some more information about it. So it's worth knowing a little more. And there's some videos of him at work as a
Mm.
blacksmith as well. Estonia is where I happened. Estonia was a small farm where my parents, mother, and stepfather went back to the land, the wilds, named for that small, out of the way Baltic state locked
Mhm.
between the Gulf of Bothnia and the landmass of Eurasia, now for this small piece of farmed out land between Steep Rock Park and Lower Church Hill Road in Washington Depot, Connecticut. They found it through friends. And while the farmhouse was being resurrected, my parents had their 4-month honeymoon in France. I remember the day clearly when Anna Willis took Tony and me by train from the South Station in Boston west to Springfield, where we changed trains, walking over the tracks from one platform to another, holding our hands tightly. Thence southwards to Waterbury, with its faux Florentine towered train station. We were met by Mummy and Father in the 1938 Woody Dodge station wagon.
Mhm.
We drove over the hills to our new home in the Litchfield Hills, the foothills of the Berkshires. Anna Wills, a constant in our lives since birth. Anna Wills, who taught us to dress. Anna Wills cajoled us to eat our oatmeal with pink sugar on it. Anna Wills took care of us during the honeymoon interlude. Anna Wills then escorted us to a new home where she would not see us again. Anna Wills, who, after an absence of decades, sent me a carefully preserved album of photos she had taken in those early years, treasured for years, and then lovingly made into a wedding present. My first memory of Estonia is sitting on the kitchen steps in late afternoon, eating graham crackers with fresh, raw milk as the sun set. This was not Boston. No maids, no cook, no silver filigree and blue grass nestled in serving dishes, no carefully rolled butter balls, and a bath in a spring-fed cauldron behind the barn with yellow soap and a stiff brush. This was definitely not Boston.
Mhm.
My parents resurrected and expanded an old farmhouse to fit their needs. They raised almost all of our own food themselves, except for sugar and flour that came by the barrel and liquor that arrived by the case. They worked hard, building stone walls and terraces, expanding gardens, berry patches, orchards, and doing endless chores and writing down endless lists of endless chores, lists that they scribbled on the back of feed bag clips, clipped together with clothespins. There was much to be learned by it all: milking cows, chasing goats, and raising pigs, the vagaries of geese, chickens, ducks, guinea hens, surely the dumbest bird ever created. One year, a pair of swans inexplicably became fodder for a fox. Inexplicably, because the blow from a swan's wing is a fearsome event. Eggs gathered, graded, candled, and sold. Summer brought hay to be cut and cured and carefully laid loose in the hay mow of the barn. Fall was harvesting everything against the long winters, butchering, curing, and smoking hams and bacon, chicken and more chickens, canning and later freezing, stocking the root cellar, firewood to be gathered, sawed, split, and stacked. Tony and I had part in all of this. I with Father around the farm with animals and tools, Tony with Mummy, cooking, baking, learning herbs in the garden. But after we had free rein to roam the countryside, with hardly a thought to where we went. Be home before dark were Mummy's last words as we left the house. After the evening milking, the chores of the day completed. My parents did the rural version of dressing for dinner: showers, clean clothes, comfortable sandals, and 2 martinis with a twist of lemon. These were served on the terrace under the canopy of a spreading Campanam elm tree in summer, or by the living room fire in the winter. My parents were no mean cooks. Fragrant breads, thick vegetable soups from our gardens, our own chickens deliciously roasted, stewed, fricasseed. Mummy made sure we were nurtured with more than simply food and a warm bed. Though a little aloof as mothers go, she provided the stimuli that launched us on our paths. The hallway outside of our rooms was covered with National Geographic maps, and I pored over them. During the years of World War II, we were quizzed on the capitals of Europe, all the rivers and where they flowed. The New York Times was delivered daily, courtesy Mr. Aspinwall, our mailman. I followed the Allied lines across Europe and the Pacific, cutting out the maps from the paper for a scrapbook in school. One year, our town sponsored a scrap drive, and we had to burn our beloved horse-drawn wagon for the metal fixtures. Another year, we scoured the fields and roadsides for milkweed pod to use in life jackets. My mother's rose garden gave way to a victory garden for winter squash, carrots, and potatoes. Probably those efforts were a little more than symbolic, yet they seemed to unite the country behind the great struggle. Our house was filled with works of art and literature. There were paintings by my great namesake, Oliver de Montalnant, as well as Giorgio de Chirico, Emily Bernard, George Robinson, and Walter Seeley. There were books everywhere. When I was 1 year old, my Boston grandfather gave me a set of Shakespeare bound in red Moroccan leather. My dad continued the tradition with a set of Kipling when I was 3. Music in our house was almost always classical. Max Bruch and Rimsky-Korsakov remain 2 of my favorites. Or for parties, dance tunes from the 1930s. On Sundays, my nearly deaf grandmother was ensconced in front of a radio cabinet, while the Metropolitan Opera was played at an excruciatingly loud volume. The evening fires in our living room found my sister and me on one couch, feet fighting, my parents on the other, mummy darning clothes and father reading aloud. Walter Scott taking us through the forests of England, Black Arrow, fair maidens or chivalrous knights and gods and heroes from the days of Homer. The usual children's books of that era, Thornton Burgess and the Mother Nature series, Millions and Millions of Cats, the Barber series, the Brothers Grimm, Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel, and all of Arthur Ransom's wonderful series of children's books on Lake Windermere in England's Lake District. When we were sick, out came the old volumes of St. Nicholas, always missing the volume that contained the denouement to the drama we were following. The Hardy Boys, Peck's Bad Boy, Van Wyck Mason, Nordhoff, and Hall's The Bounty Trilogy, which is inextricably linked to Bruch's violin concerto in my mind as I remember listening to it while reading the second of the trilogy, Men Against the Sea. I learned how the animals became what they are in Kipling's Just So stories. Down by the great, gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. And my favorite, and still read, Kim, traveling through the northern India and into the foothills of the Himalaya, Kim as a Chela for the Holy One, all in the service of the British intelligence in the great game of 19th century British Raj. When I was a teenager, my mother changed the fare to historical fiction. Wonderful sea stories of pirates, mutineers, brave soldiers, and dusky maidens on the Caribbean islands. Or Merlin and Wart, learning the imagined view of the world through the other species in The Once and Future King. Blessedly, there was no television, nor any of the indispensable accoutrements for which we now have staying in touch. We were forced back to imagination, back to our inner thoughts. We actually had private time without distractions. We had never heard of multitasking. In the evening, we played anagrams and settled arguments with the Oxford English Dictionary. For information, we turned to the famous 14th edition of an Encyclopedia Britannica. Books were simply part of the warp and woof of our lives, as common as air and as important as rain. Life was bound to the timeless cycles of the earth and the addition of years, which allowed our world to become larger from the safety of our core. Estonia was where I happened.
Ah, beautiful. Beautiful. Ah,
Tears in my eyes.
They don't make
Thank
them like they used to.
ah,
Yes, they do.
Not the same way.
okay, my story that Nol wrote is called Feed Tags. Sometime in our history, New Englanders got tagged with the belief that they were overly thrifty. They did not like to buy new goods, that there was a use for almost everything on the farm. Certainly this was true at butchering time, rendering pigs, the Sunday chicken, last year's layers. Busted machinery was put in the back of some shed until a use could be found. Some cannibalism of parts until something new and useful appeared. In the shop was a chest of miscellaneous electrical parts. There was a time when bulb sockets came completely apart with just a screwdriver. I might have to chase a part to the bottom corner, but it was there. No need for money, nor a time-consuming trip to town. And we saved everything. Bacon grease for soap, sugar and fine flour came in cotton bags, animal feed and burlap. Many a package was done up with feed bag string. Of course, to open the bag, I learned early on, single stitch toward you, begin at the right. The string was then shoved into a box until November, when under the eye of my grandmother, it was brought out, sorted, the ends tied together, and wound into useful balls of string. Then there were the feed bag tags, tan or blue, and one side carefully telling the amounts of grain and vitamins in great detail. The other side was blank, and kitty corner down the length of the card was the stitching. These my father carefully collected in a pile, tidily arranged and held together by a wooden spring-connected clothespin. The backside was blank, perfect for writing lists, especially Nol's chore list. Within a week, the 3 words at the top had been shortened to one, simply Nol, always impeccably written. There was no excuse of smudging or illegibility. Like the schoolmaster he had been, everything was an excuse for learning. Even the listing of chores was chosen in part to balance my workday as well as the length of time needed. Not once did I run out of work. The tag flopping out of the back pocket of my shorts, stub of a pencil shoved down further. Nol's chore list. 1, mow terrace. 2, scythe the blueberry patch. 3, neaten the woodshed. 4, weed garden rows. 5, scythe along the upper road. 6, restack with spacers the hemlock planks. 7, clean stream bed above dam. 8, collect 5 loads of logs from woods. I could never finish all the chores in one day. Always the jobs were too many, took too long at one end of the farm or the other. Interrupted by, Nol, could you come and give me a hand with this? To myself, what did he think? Could I really think I was going to say no? This was my stepfather, a stern man, generally fair, but not warm and loving, which of course I craved. I often worked harder, physically harder than I should for my age, trying to win that approval. A difficult position in the family unit, as I learned later in life when I became a stepfather. At the end of the day, I placed the list at his place at the kitchen table, the chores completed dutifully, crossed off especially boldly with my stubby pencil. Supper around the same table, fresh bread, often soup or stew with chicken as its base, and glasses of fresh raw Guernsey milk, a salad, a word game, bed. When I came down in the morning to the smell of dark coffee and the clanking of milk pails, there on the table was the new list of Nol's chores. Old, old moved to the top, new added at the bottom. The tag might be blue. A new day in Nol's summer of 1946.
Mm. Wow.
The aunts. Sometime in the next year, I should move from my house of 30 years to smaller quarters. It involves a lot of looking into the corners and deciding what gets tossed, what gets given away, and what comes with me. I am now the elder, the oldest of my immediate generation. I don't feel the oldest. I still have all of the insecurities laid on from life of being the younger brother and the heartache that goes with predetermined positions in families. The warp and woof of family that is passed down the generations. I have also inherited an interest in this family, those diverse threads that have somehow get woven into us all, the inheritors. My father's family may be the more famous, but not the more interesting. My mother, her mythic sister Catherine, and much younger Carol were free thinkers, correspondents, poets, and teachers. It is these three that have been the most intensely with me today as I reread the old letters from vintage typewriters, or inked or inked filled fountain pens, woofy, written on fine stationery postmarked Boston, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, or U.S. Fleet, Philippines. I was a young teenager when I first remember meeting Carol, she living in New York City, exotic enough in itself. She had a Mediterranean complexion, the French blood exerting its force, long black hair, I mean, sitting on length hair, worn up on the head, held by beautiful tortoiseshell combs. She might have just stepped from a painting by Velázquez, straight from the Spanish court. Life moved on into the 1960s and found us both teaching high school. Carol, literature in a girls' school in San Francisco, me, history in New England. Several times a year, we traded long letters about our work or trials in our work, impediments to our teaching. I am in staid, cold New England. Carol sending brochures from Esalen, educational retreats in Mexico, cutting edge thinking, so supportive and so far from what I thought I could do, would be allowed to do, or let myself go to do. I was too scared to move from my New England fastness, blundered through my winter drifts to learn of humanism and learning. If Carol was open and loving, her next older sister, Kate, Catherine de Montalon, was cerebral, reserved, and somewhat formidable. She was raised in a cosseted state at the Naval Proving Station in southern Maryland, where grandfather was the commanding officer. She did not darken a schoolhouse door until age 12, all the time absorbing the vibrations of the land around her. She went on graduating with honors from Smith into a life of the mind and writing poetry, literary essays, and a respected member of a group dubbed the Cold War Poets, often excluded and ignored by the male gatekeepers from tenured positions and poetry prizes. Several of her group did not sit quietly to the side, nor accept the ostracism unquestioned. No tenured positions, no speaking engagements, no major publications. For those 3 decades, wherever poetry was seriously discussed, Kate was there at the center. Despite centuries of women's writing from Sappho to Dickinson, even into the 1960s, their words generally dismissed as women's poetry, meaning hearth and home, which is, of course, the core and carrier of civilization. Not schools gladly, feeling that conversation for an exploration of different viewpoints from the male view perspective was simply to end the conversation. The third sister, my mother, Anne Lockwood, was born in 1904 on the island of Samoa, my grandfather's first duty station as a young lieutenant. Most of us need an atlas to find that island now, but in 1900, it was a prized refueling station for coal bunkering between Great Britain, Germany, and the United States. Returning to Maryland, Kate shared a depth of bond with my mother that went deeper than that with any other man or child. When my mother died from brain cancer in 1954, the loss for Kate was devastating. She never returned to Connecticut. Quote, "What was it, Kate, you asked me once, your tawny eyes a flicker? What, in our childhood, in our growing up, that made me love you more than any man or child I have ever had?" Unquote. Hoskins, Anne's Woods. I was stationed in Georgia. I came home, stayed for a month until she was no longer present. I put all the memories, admonitions into a chest, wrapped in chains and dumped into a pond on the farm, appropriately named Little Kettle. Kate took up the role of watching over me, if from a slight remove. This week, I have been disposing of all that weight, baggage, letters, and photographs, turning over the memories, the scenes, rewriting letters. Catharsis.
Mm. Wow.
Thank you.
So I am doing something. I'm going to read from a journal. Nol gave me all of his journals at the end of his life and told me if I wanted to read them, but when I was done with them all, to burn them. So I haven't burnt any of them yet, but this journal here is a grateful journal. And towards the end of the year 2021, Nol was having a hard time with depression, and we talk about it a lot. And it was my idea for him to start a grateful journal just to remind him of the good things in his life. And he loved that idea. And unlike me, he did it. And so I just found this recently, and I'm just going to read random samplings. Every night for months, he wrote 3 things that he was grateful for. And at the end of a random reading of them, yesterday it snowed here in Virginia, so I had a little time on my hands. And so I ended up making a compilation of the things that came up the most for him over and over in his grateful journal. And at the end of this random reading, I'm just going to read his top 15 things he was grateful for. So I'm going to start from the beginning, the first thing he wrote, and this was on January 14th, 2022. And then after that, it's just random times. But this was the first one he wrote. And I'm finding it funny. The first thing he says is, "I am very grateful for that 8-pound chicken I cooked. It turned out delicious." And after listening to you guys talk, he seems to have a connection with chickens for sure. Also that night he wrote, "I am grateful for Lynn sharing her insights and observations," probably over that chicken dinner. And I am grateful that I can hear her words. On another night, he wrote, I am grateful for the snug and warm, comfy house and bed, for walking in the snow through the woods with Jack, and for chicken soup, probably from that chicken that he cooked. I'm also grateful for Lynn's 2 little dogs, Chester and Honey, for her to lavish love on, that I can still learn new ways, inner meanings and understandings, and Mrs. B's, which was one of his chickens, blue eggs. Tonight, I am grateful for resilience, soft air, and friends. Today, I'm grateful for a clean bill of health, the rain, and sleep. I'm also grateful for daffodils, my quiet time, and working in the forge. I'm grateful for my writing class. My writing class, the full moon and chocolate mousse, which he made and was just absolutely fabulous. I'm grateful for warmer days, Carolina wrens, and a careful doctor. I'm grateful for working in the woods, and garlic mustard, and flowering trees. So here's Nol's top 10 things he's grateful for. I'll start at the bottom and work up. Number 15, he was grateful for birds. He wrote about them a lot in these journals, sometimes about certain birds like the Carolina wren or the Canadian geese, sometimes just grateful for birds. Number 14, he was grateful for trees. White oak forge. I think it's obvious he was in love with trees. Number 13, the sun. 12, memories. 11, his chickens, who we called the girls. And he didn't eat his chickens. Number 10, a comfy, warm bed and house. Number 9, his ability to read, write, and think. Number 8, soup. 7, working outdoors in the woods and in his garden. 6, working in the forge. Number 5, Jack. 4, warm or warmer weather. 3, flowers. Number 2, his writing class with Suze. But at the top of the list, and you saw it almost every other entry of his gratefulness, was his friends. And I'm going to name some of them that he named. And they include Suze, Darianne, Veronica and Jeff, Stephanie and John, Kit and Dan, Kathy and Alex, Mary Sherman and Scott, Miranda, Drew, Jeannie, the boys, which were some of his students from when he taught, and me.
Thank you, Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
It was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
That was so inspiring. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Right. The meaning of life. Good God. The meaning of life is like a peer of the realm, all decked out in scarlet and gold, sashes holding medals and swords, ostrich plumed hat, rigid features, and a faraway countenance, just possibly searching for the meaning of life or that very moment. The meaning of life in the daily scrum is not nearly so haughty and grand. It is getting up in the cold of dawn and scrabbling through the day at my chosen work. I hope to do good, my definition, and perhaps it is. The helping and healing professions can usually make that claim. For widget makers and hangers-on, I am not so sure. From day one, we are exhorted to do good, as defined by parents, teachers, religious leaders, factory owners, and general factotums, all to become cogs in the economy, in life. We may aspire to the teachings of our chosen gods. The record here is not very good. We are not very discerning between the wheat or chaff, or acting in our fundamental interests, namely out of continuation as a species on this planet. We generally are, certainly. I am trying to get through my life keeping body and soul together until my last breath. How I manage this is, if not the meaning of life, is how I have given meaning to my life.
Hmm.
Okay, this is called My Lucky Time. The two greatest moves in my life were based on intuition, chance, and faith in myself. By the spring of 1959, I had been a history major at Trinity College for a whopping 2 years, meaning I had barely completed the introductory courses necessary to be awarded the degree. Previously, the Army had seen fit to promote me from drill sergeant to floating bridge specialist and to finally teaching the weekly mandatory class on current events to my company. I found I quite liked that. I began taking correspondence courses. I could always rationalize to the head of section it was required. The idea of teaching stayed alive as I completed the last 2 years of college after discharge. It helped considerably that I was taking 3 of those classes from 3 outstanding teachers: George Cooper, British history, recruiter for the CIA, and who always had just one more book to suggest if you really wanted to understand Pitt the Younger's prime ministership. Norton Downs, medieval history, who greeted each late spring with a lovely part of squires and damsels fortified with maypoles, Lutz and his own version of mead, and Philip Banquist, interpreter of Charles de Gaulle in French politics and the Fifth Republic. In trying to squeeze all the courses in for a degree in history, my old love of hockey came nastily to the fore in the guise of my lower forefront teeth or abscesses as a result of an earlier collision with a skate blade. I almost quit. And then a chance phone call from my old headmaster offering me an opportunity upon graduating to teach various histories at my old school. It was my best job offer. In truth, it was my only job offer. I just showed up in September with a dog, a car, and a very pregnant wife. I had no idea where to start, how to begin. This was not the Army. I knew only 2 things. Do not let the students get the upper hand, and do not use anything that smacks of memorize or regurgitate. No list of memorized dates to be dropped judiciously into a paragraph of random words meant to impress me. Learning starts with curiosity. Get someone curious and stand back. If the water gets deep or wide, find a life ring and toss it. The 2 ancillary skills are reading and writing, or some medium to express what is going on inside. If someone wanted to read Popular Mechanics instead of Cry of the Beloved Country after homework was done, I provided a note as a shield against the study hall proctor. Those years teaching allowed me space and time to fly. I created my own course of reading, of learning, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Simon's values, clarification, Pearl's gestalt, experiential learning, cross-cultural learning, building stage sets for Marat Chade, Royal Hut of the Sun, Lord of the Flies. This smorgasbord of experience did two things for me. First, I came to develop friendships that are now 70 and 80 years old, and alas, now come more often to appear like the opening scenes of Chariots of Fire as we gather to remember one of our own. After 14 years of learning newly how to teach, I was moved to follow an inner dream. Could I create with my head and hands? A lot went on before I actually got to pick up a hammer, specifically more luck. Just up the Mohawk Trail from Greenfield, we found an old farm for sale. We did the dickering on the back of a brown paper bag and put down $5 and earned money. More is the pity, but gone are those days. This was not for the first time I withdrew from the world in order to put myself back together. The difference being that this time I was nominally in charge and knew what was needed for the daily chores until I had a glimmer of what to do. I made several false starts and letting time pass, observing its flow past the necessities. The first chore of the day and almost the last of night was milking our Jersey cow, Katya. She on the limpid eye of always a lowing in her throat by way of greeting. The milking stool hung on the wall. I set down a pail of warm water to wash her udder, gathered the Swiss milking pail between my knees, placed the end of her tail in the crook of my knees, and rhythmically, rolling my fingers, closed over her teats, directing the streams of milk into the foam. On a small household, a cow is the glue and the sustenance of all: milk, butter, clabber, cheese. Everyone gets fed, and nutrients from the manure go a long way in the garden. And so it has been for eons, the cycle of life, its ebb and flow across the millennia.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
The Colonel, Part 2. The first lesson was at 10 o'clock in the morning, still a little cool in the air. The east side of the ring was shaded by huge sugar maples. We arrived a little early, just as the Colonel was leading a gray horse to the opening of the ring. This time he was dressed for work. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled back to the elbows, Levi's, everyday boots, worn but shiny. I had sailor's dungarees and sneakers. I waved goodbye to my mother, perhaps on the back of her encouraging word. I only had eyes for the horse. It looked big. A quiver in my belly. I was with a colonel. I didn't always understand what he said, and I had no idea what to do. Horse looked old and tired, head down. One rein on the ground, the other flipped over a rail. This horse did not look as though it would be going anywhere soon. But here was Bonnie, more surprising, me standing right next to her, my head barely up to her withers. The Colonel led me and the horse, not tall, but more than me, inside the ring, dappled gray, and obviously blind in one eye, with a huge white spot right in the middle of her left eye. What happened? Never knew. She snuffled up to my shirt, then looked me right in the eye. Long time. It was unsettling. This is Bonnie. We walked around her, checked her nose, slid our hands down her legs or her back. I was taught to touch Bonnie, talk to her when close or was in her line of sight, reassure her I meant no harm, walk underneath her belly, fan her tail, and always to come back where she could see me and smell me. Getting to know each other was very much two ways. Bonnie had a personality. I guess I did too. A constant urging. No, a demand from the colonel that I take responsibility for my share of the relationship. Strange that I did not learn this on our farm, but from a strange and foreign man with an unknown beast. We walked to the center of the ring. He gathered up the reins, handed them to me. Lift your foot back. And the colonel reached down, lifted, actually all but threw me on top of the saddle, my feet dangling down. Oh no, nothing for my feet, no stirrups. Panic. Excited as I was up in the air, but how do you stay on? I could see only a dash into the field or beyond and over Bonnie's head. Oh my God, how do I stay up? Did he forget? Oh, the colonel is still standing beside me. Oh, wait, okay. He's explaining how to stay up here. Grip with your knees. And now squeeze with your knees. Keep your heels down. Don't let your legs wiggle. Hold a rein in each hand just above the pommel, like so. And then he started leading Bonnie and this small piece of baggage around the track. Now it's just Bonnie and me. I am on my own. If I slack off and my attention wanders, the reminder was not far behind. Heels down, grip. There was a constant stream of what to do or not to do. Sit up straight, keep your feet back straight, hands off the pommel. Or when Bonnie knew I wasn't paying attention and grabbed and happily chomping away, exert your control, says the colonel. Don't let her eat. Over weeks and months, I began to relax with the motion, how I could slide into the motion. My hips would move forward, pardon me, a rolling motion in the saddle, and then the rest of me catches up. It took a long time, round and round and round like a record. But to become a rider takes a long time, a correct repetition of a correct movement. Only much, much later did I begin to learn that the colonel was deadly serious about Bonnie and I being acquainted, in tune, simpatico. I communed, caressed, washed, brushed, cooled her, let her roll on her back. I rolled off her back, hugged her, came to balance on her neck, walk from shoulders to rump, roll around underneath, make sure her water was fresh and cool. Watching the colonel on horseback, how could they not be one? They are two as one. Why not centaur? The bonding between human and beast, where pressure of calf, knee, or thigh, the shift of weight, is answered when working with dushka by changes of speed, direction, of attention, where knowledge and awareness of the other being transcends the present plane. Spend enough time in the presence of an animal, and they in yours, beyond the usual, and life changes, it changes. You will be communicating. You will know what is being asked. On the farm, we had birds of many kinds, pigs and cows, dogs and cats. Even my dog Tess, a border collie and as such pre-programmed to do work, she loved me dearly, followed me everywhere except bed, where my mother put down her foot. The test was not to be simply a companion. Bonnie was old enough to share herself, and the colonel able to impart truths for life. They are smaller in themselves, but as a whole, priceless. This man, the colonel, was different, sounded different, treated me differently. Talk to Bonnie, he said. Call her. Let her smell you. I was not about to question the colonel. This different, foreign, and obviously blind man. I could not know for years what he was asking me to do. Talk to a horse? I could not know for years that knowledge arises from attention to all the details, that attention comes from inner discipline, and that discipline comes from accepting the wisdom and experience of someone further along the path. You may eventually diverge, but the road is broad, verge is wide. You deny yourself much if you deny the chance to clamber up and allow your feet to become a little dusty. As Kipling writes, young Kim, following the footsteps of a holy lama across the breadth of northern India for the lark, with a game of it as his chila, only to find in the end the strength, peace, and wisdom of the Holy One. All this time, I was just learning to ride a horse.
That was great, Lisa.
Oh,
Mm.
that's so
Oh.
good. What I'm going to read was something that Nol wrote in a class that we had here in Rappahannock about 8 years ago, and he wrote a couple of drafts of this piece. But once we heard it, I said, "Well, this has to be the title of your book." So this is Learning to Dance. My mother loved giving occasional dance parties. Out came her favorite music, dance tunes from the 30s on an 78 RPM 10-inch vinyl records. Jambalaya on the Bayou, Dancing on the Bayou, the Tiger Rag, the King Porter Stomp, Brazil. These were exceptions to classical music, which usually wafted through the house, except on Saturday afternoons. That was reserved for my grandmother to listen to the Metropolitan Opera at full volume, ensconced in front of our 5-foot-tall combination Victrola and radio. The top lifted up to reveal the turntable and needle arm, which cleverly folded on itself so as not to damage the stylus. The front doors open to reveal 2 knobs, on-off, and the second to change the celluloid dial, AM only, FM being a distant and perhaps unknown dream. Mummy loved to dance, but not classically, but more for the sheer joy of movement. We did too. There were days when she decided the living room had not been dusted adequately by the Johnson sisters. Tony and I enlisted, armed with voluminous dust cloths, Manuel de Fala's 3-cornered hat wafting through the rooms with volume cranked. We probably raised more dust than removed, dancing over and on the sofas and chairs, cloths in hand, trying to keep in time with de Fala. In later years, we had dance lessons. These were awful, more like formations choreographed by a drill sergeant in gloves. Boys lined up on one side of a huge room, girls on the other, also in white gloves. We were led through foxtrots, sambas, tame waltzes. It was Mummy who took me in hand, along with the Victrola and Richard Strauss, to teach me the Viennese waltz in our front hall. Even in dungarees or shorts, it seemed sweeping and majestic. Several years later, I remember vaguely considering dance as a way of life, which to me meant classical, ballet. I enjoyed the discipline of teaching my body to move in ways I directed, the discipline learned in skills for sports, for ice hockey or trick horseback riding. Dancing in parties was movement for the joy of moving, trying new steps, new twists, risking looking ridiculous. Years later, I sometimes got my legs entangled and crashed gloriously through tables and chairs. Or in one memorable scene, stepping backward to absorb the momentum of my partner launching herself in the air toward me, my foot landed straight in the center of the band's speaker. Must have been an anvil speaker. Miraculously, it kept playing. Classical dance, however, was not to be. Life continued in a more regular pattern for this lad of 18. So on this spring evening in 1952, friends had assembled. Mummy suggested I come and bring my new girlfriend, Rusty, instead of going to Clamps, the local hamburger stand, to hang out. I'm sure she wanted to meet this new and first real love interest of mine. In true adolescent fashion, when the dancing started, we moved to the darkest corners of the front hall. There was plenty of room. Our house was long, 2 stories and an attic high, all strung out along the dirt of Lower Church Hill Road. A traditional Connecticut farmhouse, it flowed from the front stoop back through the kitchen, the woodshed, out to the barn, and so that in the dead of winter, one need not step out into the snow. From the west, our house started with the wood shop, then the laundry, the back hall, and into the kitchen, a little jog into the pantry, think bar, then through a swinging door into the little living room. This room gave way to the house, which had the Victrola and room to dance. Mummy had no hesitation in pulling men to the dance areas, and soon almost all the adults were moving to the beat. As Rusty and I moved in the shadows, someone tapped me on the shoulder. Trained as I was, I stepped away from Rusty, ready for her to be whirled away. Not at all. Sandy Calder, yes, the Alexander Calder, creator of mobiles, stabiles, an ingenious miniature circus made of wire, scraps of wood, and cloth, a transformational artist of the 20th century, a man who lived to share his exuberance of life, gathered me into his arms, held me tight, and with a mischievous smile, whirled me away. Around and around we went into all corners of the living room, the dining room, the front hall, and back into more and more of my parents' friends joined us, all of us laughing. Even Van Wyck Brooks, yes, that Van Wyck Brooks, bow tie, white shirt, jacket, tall, white hair cut short and brushed back into a drill sergeant's flat top, essayist, Pulitzer winner, a defender of the romantic writers of the 19th century, in the oh-so-modern 20th, impeccably correct, standing ramrod straight. But instead of his usual dour visage, even that Van Wyck Brooks was smiling in his corner. I was filled with a kind of self-conscious but irrepressible delight. High-stepping Sandy and I circled, probably throwing in some Cossack embellishments I'd learned from Ivan, my best friend and a Russian, wonderfully lost in the craziness of the moment. Then I saw Rusty. The combination of disbelief and anger on her face, as if this were no joke, as if she'd been jilted. I could see she'd had enough of my strange house and its strange people in stranger ways. When Sandy finally let me go and I went back to Rusty, she asked me to take her home. And Rita, he married her.